The UK's governing party choosing a leader for the second time this year to replace Liz Truss. Can a new Conservative Prime Minister restore confidence, or will the country head towards early elections? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. The United Kingdom is set to have its third Prime Minister in less than a year. Liz Truss resigned on Thursday, just 45 days into the job. Her economic policies had spooked the markets and caused a sharp fall in the pound. A new leader now faces formidable economic and political challenges. Government debt has risen to its highest levels in nearly 60 years. That's 98% of economic output, as inflation surges, and there's the unfinished task of navigating the implications of Brexit. Well, the opposition Labour Party is calling for a new general election. We'll get to our guests in a moment. But first, Paul Rees has more on the contenders to replace Truss.
There are some familiar names emerging for this leadership contest from the leadership contest that saw Liz Truss elected in the summer. The first of those, Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, who finished behind Liz Truss in that contest, Penny Mordaunt, who was third there, and in what would be an extraordinary comeback, but maybe one not entirely unforeseen, Boris Johnson, the man who left office as Prime Minister in the summer. What seems to be the case so far is that Johnson is flying back from a holiday in the Caribbean, gathering support, gathering donors, getting the same team behind him that helped him win the 2019 general election. There's a WhatsApp group already doing the rounds called Back Boris, and he seems to have around 40 MPs or so already willing to back him in this race. Johnson does have an ongoing investigation around him over whether he lied to Parliament over lockdown parties during the coronavirus pandemic, but that might not put him off. And even though there's many in his party who don't believe he's morally fit to govern, they may decide that he is their best chance of beating Labour in a general election, whether that's imminent or within the next 2 years, with the Conservatives trailing Labour in the polls. Now, in terms of how these candidates will be elected, it's a much higher bar than during the election during the summer. Each one has to receive the backing of 100 MPs to go through to the final round, which means there will be a maximum of 3. There will be a lot of soul searching in the coming days, with MPs deciding whether to throw their weight behind Boris Johnson to help him reach that threshold. Paul Rees for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. They're all joining us from the UK. In London, we have Afzal Khan, a member of the British Parliament for the opposition Labour Party. In Salisbury, Peter Oborne, a political commentator and associate editor at the Middle East Eye. And also in London, Alex Deane, a Conservative Party member and political commentator. Well, welcome to you all. If I could start then, first of all, with Afzal. So, Afzal, do you think another internal Conservative Party vote produce stable leadership for the UK?
I don't think so. I think fundamentally we must be absolutely loud and clear that the party itself is badly fractured, and it's just very same people. It's just having a revolving door here. How will they make a difference? These are the very people who've been responsible for what we're going through, the whole mess. We've been made a laughingstock to the world. So I don't think just going through the same people, getting a new person will make any difference.
Let's take that point to Alex. Alex, Afzal mentioned the revolving door. Looking at the names of the likely candidates for the job of Prime Minister, you get the feeling, is the Conservative Party running out of options when a name like Boris Johnson is back in the running again?
Not just back in the running. I didn't think this 48 hours ago, but now I must say that I think Boris Johnson's the most likely person to win this contest. And I think, first of all, that's because of something that Paul was reflecting in the piece that we just heard. And I thought his reporting was very accurate, if I may say. Conservative Party members of Parliament will not want an election It would go badly for them, I think, if there were to be one called anytime soon. There's a great deal of challenge, as we just heard from the Labour Party, as to whether a new leader would have a democratic mandate, a third prime minister in a single year. Well, that argument dissipates somewhat if it's Boris Johnson, who, of course, won an 80-seat majority at the last election in 2019. So whatever you think of him, I think right now the Conservative Party is most likely to select our former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
That's kind of an incredible situation, isn't it, Peter? Do you agree with that? Who do you think at this moment is best placed to win the contest? And if it is Boris Johnson, what does that say about British politics?
What it says about Conservative politics is the grave and wonderful thing in a way. Mr. Boris Johnson is a proven and habitual liar who was sacked by his own party for lying only 3 months ago.
And yet here we are, Peter, talking about him possibly coming back, though.
And Alex Deane, I mean, no normal person. If you were a local bank manager or the man who ran your local village shop or whatever it may be, had been sacked 3 months ago for compulsive lying on a repeated and systematic basis, it would be absolutely unbelievable that he would be reinstated in that job 3 months later. But Alex Deane is completely right. It does look, for very interesting reasons, that Mr. Johnson has a reasonable chance of becoming Prime Minister this time next week, because that's when that's when this contest ends.
That is quite a situation, quite a turnaround if that comes true. I want to go back to Alex Deane and ask this question. If it is Boris Johnson, whoever it is, will the next Prime Minister be able to unite the Conservative Party, let alone the country? Because the divisions are much deeper than personalities, right?
It's a really fair question, Sami. And of course, a number of the members of Parliament that will be asked to back a Boris Johnson government are the very people that Peter Oborne rightly said expressed no confidence in him only a few short months ago. I think the most generous phrase we might apply to their position might be situational flexibility. And I think we're going to see some of that if they realise that Boris Johnson is the new Prime Minister and they prefer to keep their seats and not to incur the wrath of their own associations. Of course, the Conservative Party has local associations which produces their nominees to be members of Parliament. Then they're going to back Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, at least at the beginning. But you're right, the thrust of your question is absolutely right. With no disrespect meant to the Labour Party, who's doing their best to oppose and are flying in the polls right now, it's clear that the biggest danger to a Conservative Party Prime Minister is the Conservative Party's members of Parliament. They've done now for 3 Prime Ministers in a row. And when you'll find agreement between me and our Labour Party Member of Parliament on air with me now, is that it makes the Conservative Party look ridiculous. We're tearing down leader after leader. Consider Theresa May, Boris Johnson, now Liz Truss. The Conservative Party in Parliament has destroyed 3 leaders in a row.
And this flows nicely, I guess, to the next question. Let me take it to Afzal. Will the Conservative Party be able to withstand the pressure for an early election, Afzal, especially if Boris Johnson finds his way back into number 10?
Let me first start to say, the fact that we're discussing the possibility of Boris Johnson coming back itself, I think, shows how difficult the Conservative Party are in. It seems to me a total mess. As someone, who's just been pushed out, someone who's been a proven liar, someone who's already still being investigated, the only Prime Minister in the history who's got a criminal record, you could say, as well. And so many of them MPs are now already offering to resign. How does that go down? How does that help? And I don't see this actually taking us forward.
So will it take us forward towards early elections then?
The difficulty at the moment is the Conservative Party do have that majority and they can see the risk to their own self and their party. And that proves the fundamental point that they're putting their self and their party before the interests of the country. whereas we can see the whole chaos they have created, and it's one thing after another. You see a bar, and then you can suddenly see another lower bar, and then another lower bar, and they're making us as a laughing stock, and at the same time, millions of ordinary people are suffering as a result of their policies.
All right, Peter, I guess what we're getting at here with Afzal's comments is the Conservatives are not going to break ranks and push, or none of them will be open to the idea of early elections because they know Labour's way ahead.
Well, that's certainly true, that if there was election tomorrow morning, based on the polls as they are now, the Tories would not actually get a single seat. Now, obviously, this is midterm and things can change. And that means that there is no incentive, there's every incentive for the Conservatives to avoid an election. But the fact remains, and Afzal, it's impossible to disagree with him, that the Conservative Party has caused chaos, financial chaos, looming economic chaos. People are going to start losing their jobs, mortgages are rising, and they are chaotic, they're unfit for government. Everybody can see that. And I think that they're in danger of losing their legitimacy. And to try and, going back to Alex Deane's point, Boris Johnson is currently favourite to return. I wonder ultimately whether they might see sense on this. I mean, in a period of financial emergency, which is where we are now, to put Boris Johnson, who is not a stable figure, he's the candidate of chaos, back in charge, will start to frighten the financial markets. And I have noted that the prospect of a potential Johnson return has already sent yields rising in the gilts market, the market in British government debt.
The candidate of chaos, the expression there. Actually, I was going to come to you and Alex and say, are some of these divisions really, if we're talking about, maybe we need to explain why the Conservative Party is so divided. Does it go back to Brexit, go back to the unfinished business of Brexit? And has there been something of a hollowing out of government, of ministers, of the most experienced ilk because they were perceived to be on the wrong side of Brexit?
Well, there's certainly been some tension in the post-Brexit environment. And I think, too, there was a bit of that in the very strong push against Boris Johnson, especially in the latter days of his premiership. We've also got been very consensual so far. So now we've got a bit of disagreement because I would point, I was listening carefully to what Peter said, and I would point first of all to the fact that no one can pretend the current circumstances are good. We've had 4 chancellors in 4 months in the UK. No one can dress that up and pretend that it's a positive. But there are significant economic headwinds against every developed economy. Inflation is rampant across Europe. Interest rates are rising across the developed world. And a lot of that is not to do with whoever occupies number 10 Downing Street and number 11, our Chancellor. I would also point out that Jeremy Hunt's arrival, we didn't vote for him when he was a candidate for leader. His politics are not mine. But his arrival was one of the bright points of the brief Liz Truss premiership. It was welcomed by the markets, and it does look a good deal like he will remain Chancellor, whoever wins the Conservative Leadership Party's contest. So I wouldn't quite go so far as to say the things that Peter has said about the future. In fact, I think a lot of the economic fundamentals in the UK are better than some of our European neighbours. And if you're comparing us to what's happening at the moment in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK isn't some basket case outlier. In fact, the UK is doing rather well. And that's one of the reasons the G7 group has seen the UK forecast by the IMF to have higher growth rates than the rest of its peers.
Hang on, Alex,
so it's not quite what he painted.
All right, let's have a look at some of the stats that we've got here, because there's obviously a lot of different stats about how well or differently the UK is doing compared to other European or other countries. And the political instability has been bad for the UK economy. I think there's no doubt about that. And it was already struggling because of Brexit. If you follow some of the charts, the economic graphs, look at this one. The British pound falling significantly against the dollar and taking its hardest hit in the past month after Liz Truss's controversial mini budget. But it's been on the decline since Brexit, basically. Look at this one. The UK's international business also suffering. Its total trade as a share of GDP falling by 8% since 2019. And the latest research suggests Brexit has cost the UK economy nearly $35 billion. 5% smaller, we're told, the economy is at the end of last year than it would have been had Britain remained in the EU. Peter Oborne, is Britain just one of many countries suffering the economic consequences of, I don't know, COVID, the war in Ukraine? Or is there a particular price Britain is paying for its political decisions, whether it's Brexit or people coming in and out of number 10?
There's three factors you seem to have identified there. The first is there's global headwinds. We can see that, and Alex Deane is quite right to point to that. Then you have what is now being called by the Financial Times and others the so-called moron factor in British politics, i.e. that the Conservative Party is so out of control and employs such low-key, low-caliber figures to embark on sort of deranged economic experiments that the markets no longer trust the British government to manage sensibly. Now, and the third is the general effect of Brexit going back to 2016, and that's undeniable. You can't challenge the figures which you just read out. But to deal with the current situation, we're dealing with the idiot factor, as it were, absolute collapse, chaos at the top of the Conservative Party, clearly unfit to run the local corner shop, let alone a G7 global economy. And that is why I think you have seen significantly, and Alex will have to accept this, that the gilt market is taking fright at the prospect of Boris Johnson returning to his lazy, incompetent, mendacious, deceitful school of government, which we had 3 years of from summer 2019 till he was thrown out 3 months ago.
Afzal, some of the stats look specifically like the CPB, looking specifically the volume of UK goods exports falling 14% in the 3 months to January 2021, at a time when the global average was an actual rise of 8.2%. When you compare the UK in some ways to the global economy, the UK is kind of singled out, isn't it, for poor performance?
Well, I think this is it. I mean, we've just heard from Alex. He's trying to push the whole thing on the global situation. The truth is, this whole thing has been hit to us because of the government's policies. This is when the pound went into free fall, when the mortgage rates went up. And if you look at that around and what is happening to the families, then you realize that millions of families are now struggling. And the reason is you've got the inflation, which has gone now to 10.1%. You've got the energy prices going up. You've got the food prices going up. On the other side, you have 12 years of stagnation with the wages. That's what is causing the difficulties for us all. And the confidence in the market isn't there at all. And that's why these rates are going up and up.
All right.
This conversation is getting a bit...
Let's give Alex a chance. Go ahead, Alex. I can see you're shaking your head.
This conversation is getting a bit strange. Both Afzal and Peter are right that the mini budgets announced by the last Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, spooked the markets. There's no denying that. But inflation is running higher in every major European economy than it is in the UK. So it's very peculiar for anyone to suggest from your premise that the UK is doing worse than peers. And you cherry pick a single quarter from 2 years ago, if I heard you right, to try to demonstrate it. Of course, it's very particularly difficult for us, as you've been referring to graphs which I assume are on screen, but as you know, your guests down the line can't see what you've got on screen in the studio, so it's rather difficult to rebut that. But I rather doubt that if you're tracking the euro's performance against the dollar, you're going to see a hugely different performance to sterling's. I accept that the mini budget that we had in Liz Truss's premiership spooked sterling as well as spooking markets generally. But more broadly, that is not true. The phenomenon in international markets is the dollar being so strong, not the pound being so weak. And if you compare that with the euro or with the yen or other currencies, you'll see an equal underperformance against the dollar. And indeed, the yen is now at its lowest low against the dollar, unlike the pound. So I think there is a moment at which you have to say to yourself, this conversation got a bit weird.
Well, the charts are up there with the sources.
Really
viewers can. We haven't pulled anything out of there's no magic rabbits out of hats here. So I know there's
yes,
a lot
I'm
of
saying
opinions on this.
Your viewers can see it, but I can't.
Everybody
You know that.
Everybody can have a look at it and make up their own mind.
Yes, but I can't. I can't see it, can I, Sami? You're referring to something that I can't see.
Okay, well, I've read it out to you, and if there's any issue that you have with that, you have a chance to have your word in. Go ahead, Peter.
Generally speaking, though, the British performance of the sterling in gilt markets, etc., was aberrant after the shambolic mini budget. Alex, Deane can't get away from that. But by the way, we should give a hard time to Afzal as well. You reeled out those statistics about the effect of Brexit on the economy and trade. And now these are all Labour Party policies as well. The Labour Party it doesn't challenge Brexit. It says that it was a good thing and it has to live with it. And so Labour has not offered a different set of policies, i.e. we want to rejoin the single market or whatever they may be, than the Conservative government. So Afzal's claim that the Conservatives are uniquely poor in their economic prognosis over the last 7 years it doesn't really merit scrutiny, because Labour has not diverged from those policies.
Right, that's a fair criticism, isn't it, Afzal? The fact is, Labour also have a few divisions in their closet, don't they? Have a few division demons in the closet when it comes to not only Brexit, the issue of union strikes, voter reform. There are a few divisive issues in the Labour Party if it were to make it to a general election and take helm of the country.
First of all, let's deal with the Brexit. I'm not saying that everything what I said was to do with the Brexit. In fact, it doesn't make sense. Because what I'm trying to say here is, how come, we've got such a high inflation? Then I'm talking about also 12 years of wage stagnation. And how is it that for the last 12 years, the lowest growth in the last 200 years? Surely this is not all about Brexit. There are other factors, and I'm driving home the simple point. There's the chaos at the heart of this government who are failing now to deal with the Brexit issue as well, because the whole idea of the Brexit that the Conservatives have been pushing us is oven ready, baked ready, everything is going to be fine.
Okay, you've made that point, Afzal, but the question now is Labour also has its divisions and could be criticised, has been criticised for not having a clear vision when it comes to some of these issues, whether it's Brexit, whether it's position on union strikes and voter reform and so on. True or false?
No, I don't accept that. I mean, look, we had our position. The whole country was divided on Brexit. There was half who wanted to remain and half who wanted to leave. Look,
but as a party wants to make it to power, you've got to have a policy, haven't you? And that's been one of the criticisms of all the major parties.
We have a clear policy that we now accept the result of which we have got through the referendum. But what I'm objecting to now is that this government is failing to even move forward with this, because what we should be thinking about is how quickly can we really build up this economic relationship with our neighbors, have them good and strong? How do we go into the Commonwealth, have those facilities, improve that? How do we go to the wider world? Now, if you're too busy fighting one another, creating chaos, you can't do that. And that is the failure of this government.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left. I want to try and give it to Peter. Final thought here. An opinion piece in the New York Times today entitled "Britain is a Global Laughingstock." What is all this turmoil doing to Britain's standing in the world?
Yeah, Britain was greatly respected around the world, member of G7 and the UN Security Council, respected as sort of responsible economic management. I know it's awfully sad. Just read any foreign paper, really. Look at Der Spiegel today, and we are mocked. And this is the result of the chaos, the ruling Conservative Party. No getting away from it.
All right, Alex, in 30 seconds.
Peter will forgive me for not having seen Der Spiegel today, although I can't help but note that Olaf Scholz is facing some serious charges relating to his time as mayor of Hamburg, which makes me wonder about Germany's future too. But I mean, anybody who's observed media coverage of the UK in the last few years will know quite how obsessed and bizarre the New York Times' coverage has been in its negativity about the UK. And for that to be a proof point to me just demonstrates that there's a kind of jihad in the post-Brexit environment against the UK per se, of which that is one of the foremost exemplars. So I'm afraid it's not something that carries much water with me.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all for expressing your opinions on that one. Afzal Khan, Peter Oborne and Alex Deane. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the entire team here in Doha, for now, it's goodbye.